The chemist who changed World War II. September 1, 1939. The world watched in horror as Nazi Germany unleashed a new kind of warfare. Blitzkrieg. Lightning war. Tanks moved faster than armies could retreat. Aircraft screamed from the skies with mechanical precision. Poland fell in 27 days. Denmark? 6 hours. Norway? 2 months. France, the mighty French Republic with its Maginot Line, collapsed in just 6 weeks. By the summer of 1940, Adolf Hitler stood as master of Western Europe. Britain was alone, blooded, waiting for the inevitable invasion. America watched from across the Atlantic, technically neutral, but deeply afraid. Because everyone knew. The question wasn't if America would be dragged into this war. The question was when. And whether they would be ready. But there was something the newsreels didn't show. Something the Nazi propaganda machine desperately tried to hide. A weakness buried deep in the German war machine. Germany didn't have enough oil. And more critically, they couldn't produce enough high-octane aviation fuel. You see, not all fuel is created equal. Regular gasoline, what you'd put in a family car, has an octane rating around 87. But military aircraft? They need something far more powerful. High-octane fuel. Ratings of 100 or higher. This fuel allows engines to compress more, burn hotter, generate more power. It's the difference between a fighter that can climb to 30,000 feet and one that struggles to reach 20,000. The difference between outmaneuvering your enemy or becoming target practice. Germany's Luftwaffe, for all its fearsome reputation, was flying on fuel rated around 87 octane. Their engines were powerful, yes. But they were also limited. And German chemists knew it. They had tried everything, coal liquefaction, synthetic fuel programs. But nothing could match the quality or quantity they needed. Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, once said, "The Führer has given me the most powerful air force in the world. All I need is the fuel to fly it." That fuel would never come. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the Allies faced their own crisis. Britain was hemorrhaging ships to German U-boats. Convoy after convoy, carrying food, weapons, fuel, disappeared beneath the waves. The Atlantic was becoming a graveyard. And in Washington, D.C., military strategists knew a terrifying truth. If America entered this war, they would need to project power across 2 oceans. They would need bombers that could fly deep into enemy territory and return. Fighters that could escort those bombers and protect them. Aircraft carriers whose planes could dominate Pacific skies. But American aviation fuel wasn't much better than Germany's. Most U.S. refineries were producing 87-octane gasoline. Some experimental batches reached 91, maybe 92. But 100-octane fuel? That was practically science fiction. The United States had something Germany didn't: vast oil reserves. Texas, Oklahoma, California. But crude oil, straight from the ground, is useless. It's a thick, black mixture of hundreds of different hydrocarbons. To make it into fuel, you have to refine it. Heat it. Separate it. Break it down. And in 1940, the American refining process was outdated. Based on techniques from the early 1900s. Slow. Inefficient. Limited. The traditional method, thermal cracking, could only convert about 20 to 25% of crude oil into gasoline. And that gasoline was low-grade. Perfect for civilian cars. Useless for military aircraft. The U.S. Army Air Corps knew they had a problem. A massive, urgent, potentially war-losing problem. And then, someone remembered a Russian chemist working quietly in Chicago. A man who had been saying for years that he had a solution. A man no one had taken seriously. His name was Vladimir Ipatieff. Vladimir Nikolaevich Ipatieff. Born in Moscow, 1867. A chemist. A general. A survivor. When the Bolshevik Revolution tore Russia apart in 1917, Ipatieff was already a distinguished scientist. He had served in the Tsar's army. Risen to the rank of general. But his true genius was in chemistry, specifically, the chemistry of high-pressure reactions. After the revolution, the new Soviet government recognized his value. They kept him working, developing industrial processes. But by 1930, Stalin's purges were beginning. Scientists were disappearing. Old regime military officers were not long for this world. Ipatieff saw the writing on the wall. In 1930, at age 63, he made a decision that would change history. He accepted an invitation to a chemistry conference in Germany, and never returned to the Soviet Union. Instead, he emigrated to the United States. a refugee scientist, starting over in a new country. At an age when most men retire, he settled in Chicago, working with Universal Oil Products Company. And there, in a laboratory far from the battlefields of Europe, he began working on a problem that had stumped chemists for decades. How do you get more gasoline from crude oil? And not just more, but better gasoline. Higher octane. More power. More efficiency. To understand what Ipatieff discovered, you need to understand the problem. Crude oil is a mixture. A chaotic soup of hydrocarbon molecules. Some are small, just a few carbon atoms linked together. Some are massive, long, heavy chains of 20, 30, 40 carbon atoms. Traditional refining, called distillation, is simple. You heat the oil. Different compounds vaporize at different temperatures. You capture those vapors. Cool them. Collect them. Light compounds become gasoline. Medium compounds become diesel and kerosene. Heavy compounds become lubricating oil, asphalt, tar. Simple. But inefficient. Because those heavy compounds, the ones that become asphalt, they contain carbon and hydrogen. The exact same atoms you need for gasoline. They're just arranged in the wrong structure. What if you could break those heavy molecules? Crack them apart. Turn one big molecule into 2 or 3 smaller ones. Turn useless heavy oil into valuable gasoline. Chemists had tried this before. It was called thermal cracking. You superheat the heavy oil around 900 degrees Fahrenheit until the molecules literally break apart from the stress. It worked. Sort of. You could increase gasoline yield from 20% to maybe 35%. But the process was brutal. Uncontrolled. The molecules broke randomly. The gasoline you got was still low octane. And the equipment broke down constantly from the extreme heat. Ipatieff had a different idea. What if, instead of just applying heat, you used a catalyst? A catalyst is a substance that speeds up a chemical reaction without being consumed. It's like a molecular matchmaker. It brings molecules together in just the right way. Encourages them to break and reform in specific patterns. Ipatieff experimented with different materials. Aluminum chloride. Silicon dioxide. Various clays. And slowly, painstakingly, over years of work, he perfected it. Catalytic cracking. The process worked at lower temperatures, around 900 degrees Fahrenheit instead of 1000 degrees Fahrenheit. But more importantly, it was selective. The catalyst guided how molecules broke apart. You could control the size of the fragments. Aim for molecules with exactly the right structure. Molecules that burned clean. Burned hot. Burned powerful. With catalytic cracking, you could convert 45 to 50% of crude oil into gasoline. Nearly double the old yield. And that gasoline? 95 octane. 98 octane. With the right process. 100 octane or higher. Ipatieff published his findings. Gave presentations. Tried to convince oil companies to adopt the process. Some were interested. Most were skeptical. Catalytic cracking was expensive. Complicated. It required new equipment. New training. Why fix what isn't broken? The old thermal cracking plants were paid for. They worked fine. Maybe this catalytic thing would catch on, eventually. And then, in September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. And suddenly, eventually wasn't good enough. December 7, 1941. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor shattered American neutrality. Within days, the United States was at war with Japan. And then with Germany and Italy. The nation mobilized with stunning speed. Young men flooded recruitment centers. Factories retooled for war production. Women entered the workforce by the millions. America began building an air force unlike anything the world had ever seen. B-17 Flying Fortresses. B-24 Liberators. P-38 Lightnings. P-47 Thunderbolts. Thousands of aircraft. Tens of thousands. But there was a problem. All those aircraft needed fuel. High-octane fuel. And America couldn't produce it fast enough. The War Production Board, the government agency coordinating industrial output, called an emergency meeting. Representatives from the Army, the Navy, the oil industry. The numbers were grim. At current production rates, the US could produce maybe 40,000 barrels of 100-octane fuel per day. The military's projected needs by 1943? Over 300,000 barrels per day. Nearly 8 times current capacity. Someone in the room said it plainly. Gentlemen, unless we solve this problem, we will lose this war on the runway. Our pilots will be flying planes that can't climb high enough, can't fly far enough, can't fight hard enough. And they will die. By the thousands. That's when someone mentioned Vladimir Ipatieff, the Russian chemist in Chicago. The one with the catalytic cracking process. The one everyone had ignored. Ipatieff was brought to Washington. He presented his process to military officials, oil executives, government engineers. The reaction was mixed. Yes, catalytic cracking could produce high-octane fuel. Yes, it could dramatically increase yields. But implementing it nationwide would be a massive undertaking. Every major refinery in the country would need to be retrofitted. New equipment installed. New towers built. Training programs for thousands of workers. And during the conversion, those refineries would have to shut down. Shut down refineries during wartime. The risk was enormous. What if the conversion took longer than expected? What if the new equipment didn't work at scale? What if supply chains broke down? You could trigger a fuel crisis that crippled the entire war effort. The debates went on for weeks. Generals argued with oil executives. Engineers clashed with economists. Some called Ipatieff a visionary. Others called him a dangerous gambler. One oil executive reportedly said, "You're asking us to tear apart a system that works and replace it with an untested theory in the middle of the greatest crisis in human history. If you're wrong, you won't just lose the war. You'll be responsible for losing it." Ipatieff stood his ground. In his thick Russian accent, he said, "Gentlemen, you are not wrong to be cautious. But you are wrong about the risk. The risk is not in changing. The risk is in staying the same. Germany knows their fuel is inferior. They are desperate to improve it. Japan has limited oil access. They will fight savagely to conserve what they have. If the Allies do not have fuel superiority, this war will drag on. Years longer than it needs to. Millions more will die. Soldiers. Civilians. Children. You ask if I am certain this will work? I am a scientist. I am never certain. But I am more certain of this than I am uncertain of what happens if we do nothing." The final decision came down to a single meeting. March 1942. The War Production Board's Executive Committee. 7 men in a room. The weight of the world on their shoulders. They reviewed the numbers one more time. The projections. The costs. The risks. One official spoke. "Every option is a gamble. We can gamble on the old system, and pray it's enough. Or we can gamble on Ipatieff, and pray he's right. At least with Ipatieff, we're gambling on something better." The vote was called. 5 in favor. 2 abstaining. None opposed. The order went out immediately. Approve Ipatieff's catalytic cracking process. Begin immediate nationwide conversion of oil refineries. Priority, maximum production of 100-octane aviation fuel. This directive supersedes all other non-military oil production goals. Within hours, messages reached refineries across the country. Texas, California, Oklahoma, Louisiana. Engineers mobilized. Construction crews worked around the clock. Steel towers rose next to old distillation columns. Catalytic reactors were installed, calibrated, tested. The American industrial machine, already awakening to wartime production, shifted into an even higher gear. Ipatieff traveled from site to site, training workers, troubleshooting problems. An elderly Russian chemist, now at the center of America's most critical industrial transformation. He didn't sleep much in those months. He couldn't. Too much was at stake. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. By the end of 1942, just 9 months after the decision, the first new catalytic cracking units came online. The results exceeded even Ipatieff's predictions. Fuel yields jumped from 25% to 50%. Octane ratings soared, 100, 115, even 130 for experimental batches. By early 1943, American refineries were producing over 300,000 barrels of high-octane fuel per day. By mid-1944, over 500,000 barrels per day. More than Germany, Japan, Italy, and all Axis powers combined. And that fuel went everywhere. Into B-17 bombers preparing for raids over Germany. Into P-51 Mustang fighters that would escort them. Into Navy corsairs hunting Japanese Zeros over the Pacific. Into C-47 transport planes carrying paratroopers to Normandy. American pilots noticed the difference immediately. Engines ran smoother, cleaner. Aircraft climbed faster, flew higher. Range increased by 20%, sometimes 30%. One P-51 pilot later wrote, "Before the new fuel, we could barely make it to Berlin and back. After? We could escort bombers deep into Germany, engage enemy fighters, and still have fuel to spare. It was like someone had given us new wings." June 6, 1944. D-Day. The largest amphibious invasion in history. Allied success depended on air superiority. Before the first soldier hit the beach, thousands of aircraft had to control the skies. Bombers to strike German fortifications. Fighters to keep the Luftwaffe away. Transport planes to drop paratroopers behind enemy lines. Every single one of those aircraft flew on Ipatieff's fuel. The Luftwaffe tried to respond. But their planes, still running on low-octane fuel, couldn't match the Allied performance. German fighters struggled to reach the altitudes where American bombers flew. When they did engage, Allied fighters outmaneuvered them. The skies over Normandy belonged to the Allies. The invasion succeeded. The liberation of Europe began. In the Pacific, the story was similar. Japanese pilots, some of the most skilled in the world, found themselves outmatched. Not in courage, not in determination, but in simple physics. American carrier planes could fly farther, strike harder, and still return home. Japanese aircraft, starved for high-quality fuel, couldn't keep pace. By late 1944, the war had turned decisively. Allied forces advanced on all fronts. Germany retreated. Japan weakened. Military historians later analyzed countless factors that led to Allied victory. Industrial capacity, code breaking, leadership, courage. But buried in almost every analysis, there's a line about fuel. About how Allied air superiority changed everything. About how that superiority came from better fuel. One historian estimated that Ipatieff's catalytic cracking shortened the war in Europe by 6 months. Maybe more. 6 months. In a conflict killing thousands every single day, 6 months means hundreds of thousands of lives. Soldiers who came home to their families. Civilians who survived bombings. Prisoners who lived to see liberation. Holocaust survivors freed months earlier. Children who lived because the war ended before famine took them. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe. August 15, 1945. Victory over Japan. The costliest war in human history, finally over. After the war, Vladimir Ipatieff returned to his laboratory. No parades. No medals from the US government. He never sought recognition. Never wrote a memoir claiming credit. He just kept working. Kept teaching. Kept pushing the boundaries of chemistry. He published over 250 scientific papers in his lifetime. Held more than 150 patents. Trained a generation of chemists who would go on to transform the petroleum industry. In 1952, Northwestern University and the American Chemical Society established the Ipatieff Prize, recognizing outstanding achievement in catalysis. It's still awarded today. Vladimir Nikolaevich Ipatieff died on November 29, 1952. Age 85. In Chicago. Far from the Moscow of his birth. Far from the battlefields his work had influenced. The New York Times ran a brief obituary. 3 paragraphs. Most people had never heard of him. Today, if you drive a car, the gasoline in your tank came from a process that descended from Ipatieff's work. If you've flown on an airplane, that jet fuel was refined using principles he pioneered. The entire modern petroleum industry, the foundation of transportation, plastics, pharmaceuticals, stands on breakthroughs made by scientists like him. We build memorials to soldiers. We honor generals and presidents. We remember the battles, the speeches, the dramatic moments. And we should. But history is also shaped by people in laboratories. By refugees who brought their knowledge to new lands. By researchers who solved problems no one else believed could be solved. By the invisible victories that saved millions of lives. In ways most people will never see. Vladimir Ipatieff never commanded an army. Never flew a combat mission. Never stormed a beach. But in a laboratory in Chicago, he helped win World War II. And if you've never heard his name until today, that's exactly how he wanted it. He was a scientist. The work was the reward. The lives saved were the only recognition he ever needed. In memory of Vladimir Nikolaevich Ipatieff, 1867 to 1952, and all the scientists whose quiet work changed the world.